And we're live. Welcome to episode 4 of the Geek Book Club, where we take one book every month. We read it, we talk about it, we share our thoughts. We hope you'll join the conversation too. Case in point, this week, not only you may be noticing if you're watching this on the live, stream, if you're listening to this on the audio version, then that was a meaningless statement that I just made right there. I'm joined, of course, by my trusty compatriot, my book reader extraordinaire, my buddy Andrew Wallace at Fat Produce on Twitter. How's it going, bud?
Greetings. Going pretty well. I'm pretty excited about this episode.
I'm very excited about this episode because last week, Andrew, we put you on the spot because you had never read The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. And it was critically important this week that we bring in another special guest for this podcast, Mr. Enobong Etteh from BooredatWork. Thank you so much for joining us to chat about some cool sci-fi.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited because I just finished the book 2 days ago. So
yeah, I was running right up to the edge. It was like my last couple days of like this Thanksgiving break, and it's like 2 a.m. It's like, I'm so close to finishing this book. I need to know what happens. Oh man, this book is so good. But why I needed you to be on the show is Andrew actually discovered that I had not read this book because of you guys talking about the Expanse TV show on your podcast, The Weekly, the BooredatWork Tech Weekly podcast that we do. And he has not let up making fun of me for this. And it's totally deserved for the amount of crap I gave him about not having read The Hitchhiker's Guide. It all came back to me this month. So I'm glad that you were able to join us for this go round.
Yes, and good thinking, Andrew, because seriously, he didn't watch the show, and now he's finally read the book. So
well, and it's great too that he's read the book before he's seen the first season of the show.
Yeah. Only 8 episodes too, so
right. Okay, so full disclosure, because we're gonna get into the book and stuff, but I feel like the little bit of defending myself because I've got a toddler and I just can't do things as efficiently as I would like to. But I've had so many people telling me that the Expanse TV show was super good, super high quality. I wanted to be that guy, like Game of Thrones style. Like I was going to read the books before jumping into the show, and that's how I was going to try and set it all up. And then I just never really got around to the first part of my plan, like actually sitting down and reading the book. So now I feel much better prepared for jumping in and at least starting off the first season of The Expanse.
Oh yeah. Well, and it's nice too because the show actually, the writers of the books are actually very involved in the show, so it has a very authentic feel, and they you don't lose there's a lot of nuance in the world building that they keep in there that's preserved in the show that you don't really see in a lot. So that's one thing that makes the show pretty special paired with the books.
I would agree. I mean, especially since I just finished reading the book. Sorry, not reading, listening to the book. I will correct that.
Don't worry, I originally did the same thing myself. So
yeah.
No, I'm stoked that you tackled the audiobook, because that's one thing that I really want us to be able to discuss too is, this is a really dense and vibrant and well ensembled character story. And the performance of someone reading this book could totally make or break that experience. Before we jump too far into our commentary here, I do want to just do a little housekeeping. The Geek Book Club now does have its own Twitter account, which you can follow at The Geek Book Club. Pretty original title, given the title of the show. And that's where we'll field some of comments and questions and stuff. You can always catch us during the live broadcast. We do that on YouTube, and so you can catch the link for that and join the conversation there too. We already have Michael Upchurch and the 9X. I have no idea how this person wishes their YouTube name to be disclosed, but it's something like that. So if you want to join the discussion, we really want to make this an interactive discussion. We tell you the book a month ahead of time so that you can join the conversation. And those of you who have read the book or you're a fan of the TV show and you want to jump in on something like that, that's what we want to make this a fun space for everybody to talk about this. Not just us really cool, savvy YouTube experts, us literature majors in college, which none of us were. we want to expand this conversation and share this with everyone out there too. And to that same token, you can now find this podcast on iTunes. You can download us there. I looked us up on Google Play. We do have a small problem with our RSS feed, which I will be fixing shortly. So we're currently not listed in Google Play again, but we will be very soon. Hopefully by the time the audio version of this podcast goes live. So we'll keep you posted on that as well. Now, we sort of started talking about The Expanse. We should probably tell people what it is that we read, and that the name of the actual book is Leviathan Wakes. James S.A. Corey. I actually had to look it up and watch on my screen, read it back. Originally published in 2011, this book series was then optioned by Sci-Fi, the Sci-Fi channel, to produce a show, which I believe started in 2014. And the first book of this is absolutely phenomenal. I don't know that I've experienced a better blend of hard science fiction, a little twist of fantasy, and then almost like a gumshoe detective noir kind of feel.
Yeah, like it really hits. One of the things that's behind the success of this, I think, is just the variety of the themes that you get in this, that really you don't really get in a lot of other sci-fi these days. So it makes it more rich, really.
A richer experience, says Andrew. No, well, I mean, with you're rocking the beard really well. I mean, I don't know if you did No Shave November. I kept trim, so unfortunately I couldn't join on No Shave. No, it's this really great combination that I don't think I've experienced in quite this same detail. Like, I'm a fan of Asimov. I think Asimov writes great hard science fiction, really fun logic puzzles in his books, but his character work is really lame. Like, he doesn't write very good characters. He writes really good puzzles. And I don't know. I mean, Enobong, did you ever do the audiobook on Ender's Game?
No, I didn't. So I on the other hand, have been reading a lot of P.F. Hamilton stuff.
Okay.
What's it called again? The Commonwealth Saga. And that is very detailed science fiction. I mean, they go into a lot of broad terms. So when you said I should, hop on and read this, I was a little skeptical in the sense that even though I've watched the show, I didn't want to miss, because in P.F. Hamilton, he does a lot of description into the sci-fi tech. Yeah. He comes up with tech that, of course, doesn't exist, and he breaks it down on a scientific level. And even though that's not necessarily there in Expanse, but the way the writer breaks down, no, Expanse, sorry, Leviathan's Wakes, sorry, I'm calling it now the show. But the way he breaks down a lot of detail, whether it's, the detective noir and looking at cases, and the way Miller understands a character, or even the way Holden uses his logic to look at the general world. There's a breakdown that I like with that. And using the audiobook where, it's hit or miss with whoever actually is reading this thing to you. It came out well. It was, for me, it was a very weird experience, because I felt I was rewatching the show in my head, because I've seen it, and, the characters fell into place. So I love the fact that both had almost exactly the same feel. Yeah. And the characters came out the way that I thought they would, and what I saw and what I'm listening to at the same time.
Well, and I think that definitely speaks, as Andrew, you were talking off air, that when it comes to the Expanse television show, and this is something that I feel like TV is doing better than movies at the moment. Like, we were actually online 20 minutes before we were supposed to broadcast. It's also why we were 5 minutes late to broadcasting, just going over Marvel versus DC and, who's doing a better job of adapting these materials. But this is where I think TV is actually really shining right now, is owing the time to really flesh out the nuance of, this is a 500-page book, and it's one of a series of 5 novels. Is that the Expanse series?
Oh gosh,
I've got a website.
There's one coming out just in early December.
Six books.
There's another one coming out imminently as well.
Oh, and so there's 7 on the way. So just like with a Game of Thrones, I feel TV is a better place now to try and adapt this kind of source material. The more I kept reading through this book, the less I felt like I really wanted to see this in a feature film. It's just so chewy and it's so dense. I really wanted to. I'm like, and now I'm much more excited about going to catch the TV show. That to me feels like it's a much more appropriate place to translate this story.
Mm-hmm.
No, I definitely agree with you guys. One of the things that I liked in the show, and I say show because I see this is my problem. Like literally, my brain is going like.
Hold on. You know, before you jump into that, let's just really quickly detail. We'll break down the plot here. I don't know. Do they ever disclose what the year is relative to Earth? It's just supposed to be something like 200 years in the future.
I believe it's the 24th century.
I wanted to say it felt like it was supposed to be some kind of like Star Trek time frame, not like, you know, definitely wasn't like 1,000 years in the future.
No,
It wasn't like 50 years in the future.
Yeah, it wasn't like Dune, no.
What's the name of the drive engine? The Epstein drive was...
Oh, Epstein.
Epstein drive was 100 years before, so I think it's 200 years. You're definitely around.
So somewhere in that ballpark.
Yeah.
Because the Mars terraforming project had been going on for a while already, so
yeah, big government spending.
Oh man,
oh, those pork projects, like trying to make sure humanity can live if the Earth starts dying.
Habitable planets, schmabitable planets. Who needs them?
Terrible. But so what we have here with Leviathan Wakes is the introduction to a solar system. This is science fiction with some very hard sci-fi rules. We don't have warp drive or teleportation. Everything is a very grounded and practical feel for how humanity interacts with different settlements. So we have Earth is sort of the home, obviously, of humanity. Mars is the first major settlement, and then from Mars we spread out throughout the rest of the solar system into the asteroid belt, and those people are now called Belters. And of course, humanity has sort of changed depending on where they're living. So Earthlings are described in the book as being sort of, you know, stockier, firmer, coming from a gravity well, a place with more distinct gravitational pull. And then the Belters are described as being really long, really tall, really thin, really lean, because they're growing up in environments with much, much lower gravity. So what this book does amazingly well is split off two distinct storylines that then become entwined. And the first storyline starts off with a miner, a pilot who, or not a pilot, he's the XO of a ship that is responsible for hauling ice around the solar system. So it's a pretty blue collar kind of freighter job. And his ship gets destroyed by mysterious forces. Stealth ships come in, blow up his ship while he's out on a little shuttle with just a very small portion of his crew. And he now is in charge of these few people. He's trying to keep them safe. At the same time, a Belter by the name of Miller. So the captain's name is Holden. Sorry, that I should mention. Holden is the captain of that crew, and a Belter by the name of Miller. He's a detective on a station, an asteroid that's been converted into this way station, and he gets caught up in a mysterious disappearance of a girl from a rich family. So this young woman has decided to leave the trappings of her wealthy family and go out and join a fairly radical political group to try and bring equality to the Belters and their opposition to more Earth and Martian style law.
And she's from Earth, missing. By the way.
And she is from Earth. Yeah, that's right. And so she's from Earth. She goes missing, and her parents basically pay off the cops of this space station to try and track her down. And throughout the course of this novel, of course, the mystery becomes deeper and deeper and deeper. The different political factions, the different corporate factions that are involved, and we eventually see Holden's crew start to interact with Miller's storyline and Miller's mystery, and then the two become very entwined in the rest of the book. And we'll save spoilers till we get a little bit further to the end. But that to me was one of the most successful aspects of this, because I've seen this done poorly, or I've read this poorly, where you have an A plot and a B plot, and one plot will suffer at the benefit of the other part of the story. And here, I really felt like both of these storylines existed beautifully on their own, and it only made the book stronger when all of these characters finally came together.
Yeah, well, it's nice because whenever they come together, they really take advantage of the opportunity of reintroducing the characters, like say Holden and his crew, and then when they and Miller, whenever they they intersect, you get to be reintroduced to say Holden's crew from someone who has no idea who these people are. They're like their personalities and everything, and it's really fun to get that his point of view from based off, because that I won't. We've been with Miller for a little bit, so it's like we know his philosophies on the world, and so it's interesting to see him examining these other protagonists from his more pragmatic philosophies.
Now, I want to ask Enobong, when you were listening to the audiobook, was it just the one narrator, or were there different performers? Like, how did they delineate between the two storylines? I think that would be something, and just knowing some of the voice actors I've worked with, that could be a real challenge, trying to keep those separate worlds straight until it was time to bring them together.
So with the audiobook, it was one narrator. He didn't change his voices or do any accents or anything to try and differentiate. The difference was each chapter started off chapter 5, Miller. But it's really funny because when he does, like, at first when I started reading the book, it was like, okay, I'll have to go through this change. But then, I guess also because I've watched the show, I also want to hear the conversation from Miller's side. So they will finish a Holden chapter, they will go to Miller chapter, and I'm going, I know what's coming up. I know what he said just from the other chapter, but it comes off slightly differently when it comes up from Miller, because Miller's in the same scene, or at least part of that chapter will be in that scene. And it really, like you said, Andrew, it really sets it on just a very slightly different skew, because you're now getting, it's almost like you are this fly who is going back and forth between Holden's crew and Miller's crew. And not that you're listening to the mental thoughts of each character, and you're getting that. And it does a good job there with that, because if you listen to the audiobook, initially it might be a little annoying, maybe the first 2 chapters, but after that, it just kind of works through pretty well.
And one thing that's nice about the audiobooks, spoilers, I've listened to all of them so far. There's
Okay, Andrew, I'm sorry. I don't know that qualifies as a spoiler.
I mean, you're not leaking any information.
That wasn't. I'm gonna say it kind of feels a little like a humble brag. That's all I'm saying.
Oh well, yeah,
what you're essentially saying in this moment right now is that you're better than me because I've only read one of these books. Is what you're saying. And it makes me a little uncomfortable. I'm a little. I feel a little defensive now, and I just feel like it was necessary for me to express that. Now, please, as you were saying,
for listening to them, other than So, but I was gonna say though, it's the same narrator through every book.
Oh, that's good.
Nice. Yeah, because that's a big thing that I hate with certain series is if they change the narrator. Sometimes, like I've been terrible and just like stopped listening to a series because it annoyed me.
So we had this conversation, and I'm really coming at this from, because I'm out of the loop, where we were sort of trying to imagine what these characters would look like. And what I think is so funny is, in my brain, not having watched the TV show, the actor that they cast for Miller is he was in The Punisher, that first Punisher.
Thomas Jane is his name.
Thomas Jane.
Yeah.
That's kind of what I imagined Holden would look like. And the actor who plays Holden is a man by the name of Stephen Strait, looks a lot like what I imagined Miller.
Oh, really?
That was funny. The entire time I'm reading the book, I really had there's the Latino detective in Narcos, the ATF agent in Narcos, and I just imagined him 7 feet tall and like stretched out and super skinny, and that's what I imagined Miller would look like, kind of that sort of slightly dirtier but also vaguely ethnic look. And then I pull up the Expanse IMDb page, and it's an almost perfect flip. Like I could not have been more 100% wrong in how they cast those characters.
Yeah, You know, and that's the nice thing about it. Like, especially with the Expanse, they really could have, like, the world that it takes place in really allows for a really rich, diverse set of characters. And I mean, there are some characters where they explicitly state, you know, like Fred Johnson. You know, we know they describe him physically pretty well on there, so we kind of have an idea in our mind. But like some of these other characters, it's really nice because you really can just think of whatever combinations or however you want to interpret them, like visually in your mind, just because the universe makes it even easier to allow for that.
And without the book getting too hung up on it, I mean, getting back to the source material, it's something that the author seems to do a really good job of just taking for granted, that by the time humanity would be traveling out there, we'd just be mixing a whole bunch.
Yeah. Yeah.
I will agree, especially when you look at like Holden's crew. And when I watched the show, and Alex, who is the pilot, all right, and he has a certain draw with him. And when you listen to the book, I think they described him briefly once, and the author kind of goes into the fact that he's got a certain draw, but he's also, he's also like a Central Asian man in description. And then now that because then I go back to when I watched the show, and I'm like, yeah, it was kind of odd watching, this Southern Asian, aka like Indian, Pakistani looking guy with a sudden draw. Not that he's from a place in the US, but he's from Mars.
Yeah, he's from Mariner Valley. That's how everyone in Mariner Valley speaks.
Valley speaks, exactly. And you're right. It really adds to the fact that we now live in the solar system, right? There's no one place that you are from unless maybe you're from Earth. I think Earthers and Martians are only two basic solid points within the book. But everyone's mixing, everyone's from everywhere, and it like you said, the author takes it for granted. It's like that's just the future, man. Like, take it.
And it really helps. And this is something I hope you guys can comment on from the audiobooks. It really helps once we start getting into the different dialects that Belters speak, where they're describing
Belter Creole.
I was gonna say like Belter Creole, but it's also like part Portuguese and part Spanish with little bits of like Filipino and this mishmash, this like melting pot of language, which I think is funny that Miller in his own inner monologue is a very straight English dialect that's accessible to 21st century readers, but other characters will be written phonetically in how they speak. And that's one of those things, like it's so charming when you pick up like a book like Train Spotting, and it's written phonetically in the accent, in the patter of those characters. And here, even though Miller is a Belter, he is still written most accessibly for the audience when he does speak with an accent when he's communicating with other Belters.
It definitely helps because when you're listening to the book, and especially with Miller and that young kid, off on his name, but he goes pump up, pump up, and at first like I'm like, oh yeah, he's talking about like grandpa, pretty much. That's what he's calling him. But then Miller also tells you that in his head, and that brings you back in case it's a great way. But the author basically added that hook to make sure that the audience is still there when there's something else that they don't understand, or it's a language that he's created for the book. Because Miller because Miller doesn't just describe it. He will go, his accent's a little bit thick for a Belter from Siri Station, maybe mid-level. Now, if it was in this level, it would be a little bit different. And you're like, okay, I get it. This guy really has a deep Creole accent, Belter Creole accent here.
Well, and it's twofold too, because I think that the two authors who co-write under S.A. Quarry like did this on purpose, where there's that where he's kind of the gateway, so that we're learning about the world, so it makes it more accessible. But also, since he's working for like when we meet Miller, he's starting out as a cop with Star Helix, which is a private police company that is Earth-based. And there's this whole commentary about how he's kind of separated from other Belters because he works for the Earthers. He even wears a hat on a asteroid. I mean, come on. So it's like
didn't they describe it as being like a pork pie too? I was pretty
yes,
stoked.
yes. I own one specifically because of
I'm not wearing my flat cap. I rock a pork pie too. So I was like, hey, I'm just like Miller. I'm a cool dude.
Mine's like in my kitchen right now, so otherwise I'd wear it. But yeah, like that's one of the things where they did that on purpose also because it separates them away because language and dialect is one of the base levels of how you can identify with people, or it separates you, and they did that really well, mixing in with that at a subtle level. It just kind of clicks.
Well, and especially for their commentary, these I feel these authors had a very particular feeling about not only class issues, you know, the people that were on various levels of these different asteroids or these space stations, but then also I think they took a pretty hardline stance on things like the military-industrial complex and these firms that offer, you know, sort of military-grade solutions but don't report to any standing government. I'm almost done. I've got one episode left of The Punisher, and you know, I think this is kind of a sort of a conversation that's in a lot of our media right now, those relationships between governments, people, and corporations. And I think that this book touches on it in a way that's still providing some commentary. Like we definitely get their opinion, their insight, how they feel about this kind of structure without it smashing you in the face, without it being soapboxy or heavy-handed.
No, yeah, I think it does. I think one of the things you get from that, at least for me also, especially the fact that I finished both The Punisher and the book at roughly around the same time, is that you get that the military-industrial complex will always be there, but also because I looked at it more because it's such on a cosmic scale in a sense, it's the big solar system. Then you know, oversight is going to be very poor at this point. You know, you have space stations, you have people having secret labs and asteroids left around. I mean, not even in the book, but just you can imagine it from the book that, yeah, I mean, if you've got the belt and you've got different asteroids left and right and space stations floating here and there, people could have things around unless you don't have transponders on. Like you could turn it off and then you have no idea where anything is.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the other thing too, and something if the viewers haven't really come up on yet, is like the Belters are pretty downtrodden by the inner planets. So if you know if a few Belters die to these corporations, they're like whatever, nobody will know, which is telling.
Yeah, I mean, you in a lot of literature, like I always sort of, you have that internal struggle and that internal conflict when you read some YA like Hunger Games. And there are some people who take the districts in the Hunger Games to be like different regions of the United States. And then there are other people who take, you know, the wealthy districts of the Hunger Games as the United States and the poorer districts as the rest of the world. And here I felt like this literary universe existed on its own. It did follow that. What I think, you know, the best parts of science fiction are when we can talk about the ills of society today in a way that's very palatable, like in a very, you know, spoonful of sugar. It's easier to talk about social injustice or something like that when it's not just someone railing on about social injustice, when it's more of a metaphor. You know, Star Trek did it very ham-fistedly with, you know, Frank Gorshin, black on one side of this body and white on the other, and that was racism. But The Expanse has, or Leviathan Wakes, I should say. I keep sort of, again, I haven't even started the show yet, and I'm already influenced by what I know about the show in context of the book that I just read. But Leviathan Wakes, because I don't get the feeling, you know, the evil bad corporation wasn't melodramatically mustache twirling. They had a pretty clear-cut agenda. Now we're seeing their agenda through the eyes of Holden and Miller. So Holden and Miller find what they're doing to be reprehensible. But when you get into the plan, and we'll save spoilers, you know, probably, you know, just a little bit longer. I don't want to jump directly into just, you know, wrecking the end of this book. But when you do get to their plan, when you do get to what it was that they were trying to accomplish, there is that kind of, you know, you want me on that wall, you need me on that wall kind of moment where like they're not actually wrong. They're not actually
Yeah.
evil bad. They're just doing something that we find distasteful, and the way that this conflict breaks down, they are the antagonist. They are the bad guys because they're doing things that are very unseemly. But in this great galactic conflict, and with the influences coming from outside of our solar system, I could totally understand where this type of an entity would kind of need to exist, even if we didn't necessarily want it to exist.
Look, if you watch The Punisher and you look at the way the bad guy in The Punisher is, it's exactly like the bad guy in Leviathan Wakes, in the sense that, things had to be done. That's the mentality of the bad guy. And when the argument is laid out, you will go, that is very true. Now, the problem always lays from, is this the right way to do it?
Right.
Or is there a better way to do it? And
is there a way we could do this with a slightly smaller body count?
Exactly. Yes. But what was interesting was also when you get to that point and you see the perspectives of Holden and Miller and how they deal with the final reaction to that, it really tells you of how those characters differ on a very large scale. Like, you see the differences as you move along with the book. That, Holden is one type of person. He's seen a certain way. He's seen to a large degree as being righteous. They use that term a couple of times in the book. I called him naive in my head a lot of times. And then you have Miller, who was more of the realist, but also a little off the bend.
a little bit more morally flexible.
Yes. His flexibility was really flexible, if I would say that.
His flexibility was really flexible.
I know.
No, I mean, that's a great way to put it, actually.
But it really, you see that. What I liked in the book was that, I kind of looked back at the show, is that, you didn't get that build up like you have in the book, because you see it as it differs. At first, I was waiting for both of them to meet up at some point. Then they meet up, and then I'm starting going like, this relationship is not gonna last, because they are different, even though they have the same goals and certain principles are the same, but they are really different individuals. And it really showcases when they come together, because you can see it clearly in the book.
Well, and I'm glad you sort of set that up that way, Enobong, because I think one of the other beautiful successes of this story is we've got two different versions of the average man who is thrust into the limelight, who is thrust into a world bigger than himself. And these two characters represent very different sort of hero journeys or hero arcs when thrust into these grand circumstances. And again, I am just so pleased at how well stapled together this story is, that one of them doesn't get pushed to the side. One of them isn't eclipsed by the other. I felt very much like you do. I feel like maybe Holden was written perhaps just a touch too naively. By the time we get to the end of the book, this guy's seen a lot, and yet he still is clutching to some notion of morality from the very beginning. I felt like maybe he didn't evolve as much as he could have in the course of this one book. But I didn't feel like his storyline suffered, so that Miller could be, could be a grand example of like a sacrificial storyline, or Miller didn't feel like he was just a depressed beat cop, and then Holden rose to the occasion to be this virtuous individual. Both of them felt like they were appropriately fleshed out for the story, appropriately focused on, and neither really suffered at the story of the other.
Well, and both characters, like, after they meet, and then as it kind of goes on and you see kind of the separation a little bit, like there are marked effects on both Miller and Holden from each other on that, and that lasts all the way through the end of the book for both characters. And and just the way that they wove that together, they had a definite effect on each other's personalities and their view on life that they've come to question, that we've seen them have through the entirety of the book too. You know, a little bit like it wasn't like they turned over a new leaf sort of thing, but you could still kind of see that they were starting to question some of their held beliefs, preconceptions.
Yeah, I would say they both left an imprint on each other. One that I think was more perceived by Holden, especially when you get towards the end of the book. And Miller, it was there because there are certain things that he states, but he also perceived it differently. And that's the good thing about it. It wasn't one of those situations where, you read a book and they go, okay, yes, this guy affected this guy affected that. It was, this guy affected, one guy, Holden, and he saw it a certain way, but then Miller took it very differently and still went on his own path. So the writers did a good job where, yeah, there were lessons learned from either character, but the way those lessons were transcribed by each character out was completely different and specific to the characters themselves. So it didn't feel like a betrayal of the character. It felt like, okay, yeah.
It felt like character growth instead of just for some reason we're going to have the character do this now, and that doesn't gel with what he's done previously up to this point. And I feel like there are so many. One of the reasons why I wanted to ask you if you ever had chewed through, because we had a long conversation after the film Ender's Game came out way back when.
Yeah.
Because I look at a world that's as well built in science fiction, and the first Ender's Game book I would put up there as an example of just an amazingly good science fiction read. But even someone like Orson Scott Card couldn't tell the same story from a different perspective in the context of one book. He had to split off a completely different series for Bean, the Bean saga of the Ender's Game world. And it was one of those things. It was like he came to this many years later, completely different perspective as an author. I have some issues with him politically, but the Bean stories were actually pretty good. But they can't be stapled together. It's not like you could take chapters from Ender's Shadow and put them in Ender's Game and have a cohesive narrative, because the author's perspective is so different from the passage of time. And here, I think we've just been shown an amazing example of keeping two main character story arcs in these authors' minds. It is two authors that are writing.
Yeah, I was going to say that. Would we say that because it's actually two authors and they decided to tackle it as picking one character over the other?
I think so. I'm just surprised that one author didn't win. One force of personality doesn't seem to be guiding this. It does seem to be collaborative in a very true sense of that word. And the book, even in the structure of the book, does this beautiful thing where once Miller and Holden are directly interacting with each other, when we go from chapter to chapter, each chapter is a Miller chapter or a Holden chapter, but the chapters will also rewind just a little bit. It's like you go on a commercial break and you come back just a couple seconds before where you left off, so that you don't feel like you've missed part of the story. So you'll get the end of a Miller chapter and Miller does this crazy thing. And then you go to the beginning of the Holden chapter and it's just a moment before that beat, so that you can get Holden's reaction to what Miller just did. It's just beautifully constructed. I can't praise this aspect of the book enough, that it is as well pieced together as it is.
I'd say it's about one of the closest books. Like, it's a very cinematic feel whenever you're going through, and it illustrates it really like some of the best I've ever seen.
Yeah,
I'd say, and
a very clear sense of what's going on. Yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely. There's one thing too. I'll say I love going aside from the characters, like just as far as the world. One thing that stuck out to me for a long time, that I loved about it, like there are little nuances, like how the ships are constructed, how say this is like the ship. Usually in sci-fi, it's like you'll have the decks, but because as you said, there's some very hard sci-fi limits that they have, like there's no inertial dampeners. So if you're going to do a hard burn to get somewhere quick, you got to be strapped in a crash couch, pumping drugs in you to keep you alive.
Yeah.
Well, so they have all their decks.
Let's actually talk about that, because this is one of the things. Like, I think hard science fiction can sometimes get lost. Can miss the forest for the trees. There are a few science fiction books that I've read where their explanation of technology is in depth and amazingly well nuanced and well researched, but it seems to come at the expense of storytelling. And here we get just enough, science-y grounding to help explain what plot points, why certain things have to happen the way they do. And they go to great lengths. So what you're describing there, Andrew, we take it for granted that in science fiction, you board a spaceship and then you are just perpendicular to the plane of that spaceship. In Star Trek, right? You walk on these floors and the ship will travel forward, but you won't get slammed up against the back wall when the ship starts moving. And it's because in Star Trek, we have the magic of a special force field called the inertial dampener. And that's why the ship always gets super shaky when it's under attack, because the power is being routed away from the inertial dampeners, or they're damaged, and it causes, magic rocks to fall from the ceiling whenever they get blown up. I don't know why the Enterprise has like explosive like bottle rockets in the consoles, and why they just keep like a store of styrofoam rocks in the ceiling.
Yes. When did we install that dirt in the bridge?
But apparently that's what 24th century Starfleet spaceships need to have. I don't know, maybe it's like special kind of insulation or asbestos or something. But anyway, so in the world of Leviathan Wakes, it's so wonderfully explained. Humanity has not expanded beyond the solar system, and it's because of these kinds of limits. The faster you go, the more inertia is applied to your body, and these ships are designed around that notion. So when the ship's going forward, the wall that would be behind you in a Star Trek type of spaceship actually becomes the floor, because that's what's sort of pressing you, that's what would be pressing you into the back of the ship is that momentum, that forward momentum of the ship traveling. And so their explanation, their description of this world, it really, really helps expand on actual plot elements. There's after one of the sieges, they're trying to get off a Martian spaceship. It's such a throwaway moment. I mean, not a throwaway moment, but it's such a small moment. It's a small moment of nuance. They're getting off the Martian ship. They're escaping with one of the Martian Marines, and they leave the ship so quickly that the inertial forces, the Martian soldier had been injured, and the inertia was too much for his rib cage, and it caused his damaged ribs to actually lacerate his other organs inside his body. Like when you're dealing with forces of gravity, like you've got a ship that's traveling at fast enough that it's creating 7 times the amount of gravity that we would experience on Earth. That becomes a very serious aspect of that society. Like that's something they have to deal with in their world. And it also helps for us, the reader, to understand what the consequences are. You can't just go to warp drive and be fine. Like you accelerate too quickly and you're not strapped in, you're dead.
Well, and I mean, the inventor of the Epstein drive, they're like, well, because he suffered from this, and they're like,
he's technically still suffering from it.
Yeah, they're like, if you get a powerful enough telescope, you can still see him. Luckily he left the plans on his wife's computer.
Right. It's a good thing he wrote down some notes.
Yes.
For me, what was interesting was, like I said, I've been reading P.F. Hamilton's books, and he does a great job and explain, his books are really sci-fi. So there's wormholes, there are quantum busters in terms of weapons, people can regenerate and all that stuff. But he explains all that almost to the T, where mentally you start thinking that you can create it yourself, or will come to the time. So when I switched over to this, I was going, okay, look, I know how it's done in the TV show. I'm not sure if that's just a TV show thing, or in the book, do they actually explain? And I was glad to see that they broke it down also. You know, when you read a sci-fi, I think when you read a sci-fi novel, for you to be engrossed in the sci-fi-ness, it can be magic. You have to have a logical construct for what your tech is, whatever tech it is, whether it's the crash couches, not just the fact they have crash couches that, yeah, because you're running at 7 times 7 Gs or even more, whatever the case may be. But it's the way the crash couches are made, you know, because they're personalized. And if you use an unpersonalized one, it's really rough on a trip. Miller talked about that in certain, you know, in certain chapters. And then the drugs that are pumped into you, you know, they help you survive, but also they stop you from throwing up your organs as well. You know, like things like that, where you now start going, oh, okay, all right, I see how it is. So space travel can be rough, you know, it can be a rough thing. And then that got me thinking about the Merman expedition, you know, out of the galaxy, of saying, I know, you know, how would they deal with that? Granted, it's a bigger ship. So basically, you know, I'm not thinking of the size. It's a much larger ship. So which means, yes, G's would be spread across and you're using a different drive. It's going at a slower pace, not necessarily at 7 Gs, but maybe at 3 Gs, which is, yeah. So maybe it won't be as fierce. And you're going through all that process while you're reading the book, because the author does a good job of explaining, maybe not as detailed as some other books, but he does a good job of saying, this is the, like you said, Juan, this is the world and situations that you have to deal with if you're going to live in the Leviathan Wakes universe. You know, these are the things you have to experience. You know, if you're doing a dogfight in space, you know, I remember one of the dogfights or one of the battles they were talking, you know, I was reading through, and I remember in the show, but then I started thinking of Star Wars, and the fact that, you know, dogfights there just don't follow any principles whatsoever in science fiction. But I'm looking at this, I'm going, wow, this makes sense. This makes sense because of, like you said, the G's that are affecting you and the decisions you have to make. You're like, okay, we got a couple of enemies. Who do we take first? What's the closest and what's the less damage to our ribs?
Right. Well, isn't it been really interesting that, like, as science fiction stories have evolved over time, we start off with like Star Trek in the 1960s. We get to shows like the newer Battlestar Galactica. Just think about how cool it was when you saw a Viper do a 0G turn in Battlestar Galactica with, you know, keeping momentum. You're like, okay, that's actually how something would react in space. You look at Star Trek 3 and the engines on the Excelsior fail and it comes to a stop, and you're like, that's not how space works. That ship would keep going forever.
Right. Yeah.
And so now we get through that. We get through, you know, early 2000s Battlestar Galactica, and ships are now playing with space in a slightly more realistic way and how they would need to maneuver. And then we get to a story like Expanse and Leviathan Wakes, where not only that, there's like no, you look at Battlestar Galactica now, and Starbuck is pulling off maneuvers in a Viper that probably should have turned her into like some sort of minestrone soup on the inside of that cockpit.
Oh my gosh.
And the book won't let that go. Leviathan Wakes will not let those kinds of details go, and they become critical to the quality of the story that they're trying to tell. It helps provide the framework, it helps provide the structure, and it also helps explain the limits when those limits start to get broken by outside influences. And this is my terrible hacky way of segueing. We should probably start talking about some spoilers.
Oh yeah, spoiler warning, everyone.
All right, spoiler time.
Spoiler time. Okay, so if you want to avoid spoilers, you're watching us live, turn us off right now. If you're listening on the audio podcast, we've got to find a way of like actually marking where spoilers stop. Just sort of backtrack to the end, and hopefully we won't still be talking about like stuff that'll ruin the book for you. But from here on out, we're assuming you've read this story or you're familiar enough with the TV show that you're not too concerned about us wrecking individual plot points. And this is also where we should dig into the plot just a little bit more. So Holden's original ship, it's an ice hauler. They come across a derelict space vessel, and it's just a bait ship. So they arrive, they send a shuttle out to go examine this derelict spaceship, and mysterious stealthy attack cruisers come out of nowhere and blow up Holden's ship, and that crew is then tasked with investigating what happened to their ice hauler, their ice freighter, and they discover clues that lead them to believe that Mars was involved in the destruction of their ship. And so this is, in this timeline, Earth is the original cradle of humanity. There's something like 30 billion people on the planet. There's still this huge force in space exploration and space military, but Mars is where all the cool tech has gone now. So the first major colony that humanity settled, they're like at the bleeding edge of military tech and spacecrafts, and they're known for having all of the really cool stuff. And one of the characters in the book even remarks when he's on a Martian battle cruiser, like, man, we Earthlings just can't build them like this. The Martians really do know what they're doing. And so from there, Holden is investigating the disappearance of, was it Juliet Mao?
Juliet Mao? Yeah. Mao Bukowski Mercantile?
Holden is not investigating anything about Juliet Mao. It is...
No, Miller. Miller is, sorry. So at the same time, Miller is investigating the disappearance of this young woman. He's on a space station, the Ceres space station in Saturn's rings. And it's sort of described, there's almost like a Tatooine feel for me in Ceres, the way it's described as being this sort of like hive, and there are some seedier places of it. And then there's some places where people just want to like live and not be molested, and that's fine. And so he's investigating this disappearance, but he's like a total drunk cop. And when he starts digging into her disappearance and he starts discovering more about her ties to a political organization called the OPA, what is it? The Outer Planets Alliance? Is that what it is? Yeah, the Outer Planets Alliance. And they're sort of like the IRA, if you're up on your, sort of Irish, sort of history. But again, they're sort of a splinter faction, a very highly political and radicalized splinter faction, where they are extremely distrustful and very prejudiced against people from Earth and Mars. So because Earth and Mars have this stranglehold on the solar system's economy, the OPA is acting as sort of a counterweight to that, or counterbalance to that. And so in the belt, they are a very important and a very so they carry a lot of influence in this world. And so as he's, sort of digging into Julia's disappearance, he starts to discover that this is more than just some girl who just sort of disappeared. Julie's appearance, not Julia. Anyway, so Julie's disappearance, and he gets called off of the case just as news from Holden's crew comes out that Mars was responsible for destroying an ice freighter. This sends the entire belt up in a storm. They're super angry about this. Obviously, they would be. And it kicks off what eventually becomes a solar system-wide war between Mars and these outer rings and these outer planets. But of course, the book couldn't just be that straightforward, because it wasn't really Mars, after all, that destroyed this ice freighter. We sort of discover some other things that are happening, and that's where we start getting into this commentary on the military-industrial conflict and these other sort of shady military-esque organizations that are trying to operate the solar system from behind the scenes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, and the whole, you getting into why they're manipulating and the whole.
Well, I mean, we're gonna tell them why. I just needed to drink water.
Well,
I didn't want to just ramble on about the whole. I hate it in podcasts where someone's like, "Let me just spend an hour telling you the plot of this movie." I didn't want to do that.
No. Well, and it's I mean, well, and the whole thing is, as they're going through, we come across something extraterrestrial.
Oh, let's just say it. No, there's some legit alien influence happening in this book. That's what we're dancing around. The aliens are trying to kill us, right?
See, yes and no. Maybe so, or maybe not.
Yeah.
You know.
Sorry. You go ahead.
We're far too polite to be podcasters. No, you please. I insist.
Yeah. Yes, there is that alien influence in that mix, but I think one of the things that plays a big role, which we haven't talked about, is it goes down to basic human nature and how that really doesn't change. Doesn't matter whether you're on an asteroid, you're on a different planet, and how people think. As you take the OPA, for instance, as you said, the IRA, right? It literally boils down to a resistance movements of saying, yes, we are our own people and we want to be free, but still you're very dependent on Earth and Mars, depending on where the location is. And then you have the other aspects of how, Holden behaves and thinks. Basically, the war was caused by Holden.
Yeah. Well, again, because in Holden's self-righteousness, he's trying to communicate the evidence that he's found. He finds these parts on the derelict ship that lead him to believe that Mars was involved. So instead of investigating further or reporting back to any other ship captains or to any other belters or space stations or police crews, he basically just broadcasts it. Basically just makes
to everyone.
Mars did it. You're gonna get mad, guys. Mars.
But remember, Holden said no. That's not what he said. He said let's clarify this, because Holden did not just go out and say it was Mars. He says
I found Martian parts. That's right.
We found parts that we believe to be of Martian origin, and it doesn't mean that that's what Mars did it, but that's what we found. That's exactly what Holden said, but to everybody else.
And tell me, how beautifully does this book get human nature right, though?
Yeah.
Because it didn't matter that Holden put that qualifier on it. That's what kicked off a solar system-wide war.
Well, and he does
that as an implication, and the book absolutely nails. We would have that kind of a knee-jerk reaction.
Well, and he does this twice, because he does it with the initial. Then wasn't it with whenever he found out that that Earth Tech was involved, and he does it again. He's like, "Well, but if we have all the information out there, then all the lies are out of the way." And I'm like, that's.
Yeah, Miller was like, "Yeah, dude, don't even do this."
I know. I love the fact during that particular section, he's like, "Oh crap, you already said it, didn't you?"
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh man.
Well, because ultimately, what we eventually find out. So, and I love that the book doesn't feel like it's wasting our time. The story really does evolve through these plot points. We're kind of laughing about it now after the fact, but we're on that journey with Holden. We see evidence of Martian technology. He broadcasts that. The solar system erupts into conflict. He finds evidence of Earth-based technology in some of these stealth ships, and he discloses that. And it further blows up, the relationships between Earth and Mars and the other people living on the belt.
But Earth attacks Mars, right? If I'm not mistaken.
They blockade Mars.
They blockade Mars because most of the Martian ships are by Jupiter.
That's right. Mm-hmm. Because they've been fighting the different organizations of the belt, the different belters that are out there, and so
and nobody's been willing to drop rocks. Pretty thin. Well, and nobody's willing to drop rocks yet. That's the whole thing about this is like it could be even worse, because with Mars, especially, even Earth too. Like if you dropped rocks down, you basically destroy a civilization. Well, a micro civilization. You could you could devastate, like completely kill an entire populace. And so, with all this happening, still no one quite wants to go to that level, which mirrors a lot of what we see today too. So
oh yeah, like we see a lot of armed conflict, but we're not quite ready to do the nuclear option, which in this book is we'll strap some thrusters to a giant piece of space rock and drop it on your settlement, because
it's funny. It's funny you said that. There's a passage where during the blockade, I think there was a space station that was destroyed above Mars, and then the narrator said, I think Miller was watching like the news reports, and he said, I think Miller's thought process was like somebody held restraint by not actually raining down rocks on Mars. Like you could tell that, it was, it's that tactical ploy that you get nowadays of like, we'll just bomb there, right there. Just to tell you that we're around, right? Not the main, not your main civilization, your headquarters, but just that little important thing that you have right there.
Yeah,
we're here. So it was interesting to see those aspects in the book. But again, like to me, it's, it made me, I liked Holden in the show, and I was on the edge of like not liking him on the book. I was like, this dumb idiot. Oh, Jesus Christ. And I'm like, what annoyed me was more of his crew than even him. I get that they really trusted him and they saw him as being the better versions of themselves. But somebody, I mean, his EXO didn't do a good enough job of telling him he needs to stop that crap.
Yeah.
Well, and also there is something in the structure. Maybe this is the thing that I think I can't say that it didn't work for me. I think I felt vaguely unsatisfied with how we eventually arrived at Holden's romance with his EXO. And there is description of their relationship as we go throughout the book. And at one point in the story, about 2/3 of the way through the book, Holden finally gets up the gumption to tell her that he cares about her and that he wants to be with her, and she shoots him down. And then the drama of the story continues. The actual mystery gets deeper. We get some really great military action. And then she just kind of gets drunk one night and says, oh, we should just go ahead and be together. And it's the one part of the story for me that I felt was the most tacked on. That there's was some notion like we have to have some kind of romance. Miller is become infatuated with Julie Mao. And so he's got like a fixation on this woman that he doesn't know. And so we need to do something for Holden that's sort of analogous to that. Let's have him fall in love with his EXO. And it works, but it doesn't work as well, or it doesn't vibe as well for me as the rest of the structure or the rest of the story of this
book. Now,
Andrew,
would you agree? I thought it was handled much better in the show than in the book.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
Because I think they did it earlier. Like in the show, it felt more natural early for that to happen as opposed to where it is in the book, where it falls in at a later time. So when you see it in the show, it just it happens more naturally, I think, in the show. Because in the book,
it felt very abrupt in the book. I mean,
it was like for it to happen
one chapter to the next that all of a sudden she's like, "Yeah, let's go for it," and you're like, "Oh."
I know. Okay. I love the fact that Holden's like, "Wait, what?" Dude, so.
It's funny you mentioned, because when I think about it now, when she says that, right, that's the same scene happens in the show, but they moved it timeline wise earlier to actually fit what happened that brings them together. And you're like, so when I was reading it, I was like, how come they're not? How come they? And oh, really now?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Never mind.
Well, in the show too, they show more interaction between Naomi, his first officer, and him on the Canterbury, the ice hauler that got destroyed. They show that because in the book, he's not really that. He doesn't really interact with the people who are on the shuttle with him whenever they go over to the Scapuli, which is the bait ship, and so they built that a little bit, which was nice. They spent more time. Like they spent some more time with those characters in that early part of the story that would be the first half of the book, a little bit, and that helped build their characters out. And that was that's one thing I feel like the authors, when they're working on the show, got to kind of readdress.
Yeah.
Which was nice. So yeah.
I agree. I haven't seen the show. I don't know.
No, I don't want to like give away too much, you know. So,
no, but that's exactly, I think. But that exactly, to me, you know, there every now and then I come across, you know, an adaptation that actually does improve upon the story, and this to me would have been, if I were the authors, in hindsight, going, hey, you know what could we help the audience with in our story? And I think for me, one of the most glaring aspects of the interpersonal dynamics of Holden's crew would be establishing their relationships a little bit clearer from the very beginning of the story. We get a pretty good sense of how they relate to each other by the time we get to the end. But that's one of the few areas, especially as it pertains to Holden and Naomi, Holden and his XO, that didn't feel like, that felt like that was the least focused upon part of crafting the drama of this story. And when these things progress, they progress in very abrupt changes, in very abrupt shifts. Suddenly there's a dynamic there that wasn't there before, and it's not a deal breaker. It doesn't sour the book for me, but it was something that was a little distracting for how well constructed the rest of the story was.
Did any of you, speaking of Holden's crew, is Amos anybody else's favorite character?
I liked Amos a lot.
Amos is awesome. Like, he just says
I have a soft spot. I mean, Miller is ultimately my favorite character because I have like this, you know, I've always wanted to see a Casablanca in space, and this felt so close to getting me to that kind of gumshoe detective film noir, man out of his depth kind of a story. So that's why I side with Miller, but every time Amos pops up, it's gold. It's just perfect. He's like the exact right character to have in that moment every time he appears.
No, he is. I mean, not to what he said, the way he says stuff can be a little crass, and even that scene. But when he finds out that Holden and Naomi are hooking up, the way he describes it, it was like, because basically you hear the monologue in Holden's head. He's like, I'm trying to make it clear that, you know, everything's cool with the team, so I'm just not going to be all touchy-feely to her. So he goes, Naomi, can you please pass the sugar? Oh shit, you guys are shacking up. But that's literally how Amos
I know. Actually, your enactment there, I think, was pretty close.
That's pretty close. Yeah.
My favorite, my all-time, you know, just in everything that I love about this story, Amos is responsible for my favorite moment of the book. The Rocinante is under attack. That's Holden's. So when Holden escapes with his crew from his ice hauler getting destroyed, they get they get acquired by a Martian military vessel. Like a major Martian battle cruiser picks them up to interrogate them, but then that Martian battle cruiser is destroyed under very mysterious circumstances, and the team of Martian soldiers that helps them get off the ship help them get to a Martian, I don't know, what would we call this? It's not like a light frigate, but it's like a
corvette.
It's an attack ship.
Yeah, it's like a Martian
corvette
attack ship, a small, nimble vessel that can be docked inside another larger battle cruiser type or aircraft carrier type vessel. And so later on in the book, that the Rocinante is responsible for leading an OPA attack on a secret scientific installation from one of these private military firms. And it's in the middle of the battle. Their ship is just getting shot to shit. And Amos is responsible for patching up, I forget, it's like some pipe.
Yeah.
And Holden has this running inner monologue about how, like, oh man, if Amos doesn't tie that piece of pipe down, if we accelerate, it could become a projectile and kill him. And so he says, you know, like, and, you know, Amos, you're going to tie that down. He's like, I don't have time to. And he's just like all full of piss and vinegar. And he finally escapes and he gets out of this like hold. And he's like, aren't you glad I didn't tie that piece down? Because I'd have been dead. And you're like, it's such an Amos moment. And it's still in the context of the book, clearly illustrating to the reader any floating debris after your ship has been shot up now becomes further shrapnel or further more projectiles that can kill you if your ship does something as simple as turn in space. That's not going to stay relative to your position. It's just going to become shrapnel. And again, it just further illustrates for the reader just like how dangerous basically everything in space is trying to kill you, even parts of your own ship. And Amos like just couldn't care less in that moment because he had a job to do. He's just such a great character to help bring the audience along for some of that exposition.
You know, one of the things I liked in the book, I don't know if you guys picked this up, but the fact that, you know, Amos sounds like your man's man, you know, mechanic. But really he's an astro engineer.
Yeah.
You know, and he said that there was one part where Holden said that it's like 200 years ago, people would be dying to get your job. Now it's just, it's just normal. You know, the fact that what you do 200 years ago, aka present day now, would be considered like, you know, I mean, like just the upper echelon of going to school.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In this world, you're just an engineer. Pretty much.
I like the fact that he's, you know, in Holden saying this, making it as a compliment, and Amos is like, "What'd you call me?"
Oh yeah, yes, exactly.
Well, and again, it's just for a society that builds itself on being able to travel throughout the solar system, there's nothing romantic about it. There's nothing Star Trek exploration, you know, new alien civilizations, anything like that. It's just this grimy, worn world. In my brain, I started just sort of piecing together what I thought this would look like. And it's like early Ridley Scott with, you know, some influence from like, I kind of like, not in terms of tone, obviously, but shows like the Orville, where not every ship can be the flagship of the Federation. Maybe there is just some crappy Federation blue collar vessel out in the middle of nowhere, just like doing cleanup work and doing really boring stuff because their crew's not as good as the crew of the Enterprise, you know, like pieces like that kind of all fit together. And you get a sense of the Martian Navy is just this incredible, formidable, high tech, but low numbers outfit. And then you look at the Belters and it's like their ships could have been stapled together from like cereal boxes and jelly jars or something like that.
And they even go like to talk about the food. Like there's, you know, about how like a lot of them are like fungus that they've repurposed, you know. And and so when I was really reading this, I came across having read, you know, now read the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. I came across an inadvertent I actually asked on Twitter, SA Quarry, if this was on purpose or not, and they said it wasn't on purpose. But they had two separate parts in the book where like Miller is like, well, he went and got something that wasn't entirely unlike coffee.
Right.
Yeah, like another one with like a lasagna, and I'm like,
wait a minute, that sounds a lot like Douglas Adams talking about space tea.
They're like, and I asked them, I tweeted, and they were like, well, we've read that so many times, like it probably just slipped in.
But this is also, I mean, again, in authors that I feel have taken influences from other properties, but not just ripped them off. I feel like they've really mashed this up in their brains and come up with something really fresh. That same notion, I think, was explored by why I referenced Asimov earlier on in this podcast is because the Caves of Steel series has kind of the same feel. It's an Earth where the population is so high that everyone lives in these like domed bunker cities. It's just you have to keep building up because you can't keep building out. And what they describe in terms of population management and resource management, recycling, foods grown from different cultures and yeasts and hydroponics sounds a lot like what the Belters would have to do to keep a society working on some kind of space rock, you know, like what their descriptions of what the people go through to recycle, you know, just resources are so precious and that's baked into their culture. And it's something that means a lot to them. And then there's a sort of cavalier sense coming from people who are from Mars or Earth because they didn't have to grow up with quite the same restrictive or recycled lifestyle.
Yeah. Well, and it makes people, and the Belters always think that anyone who grew up in a well just takes everything for granted because nothing, not even air is free for Belters.
Right.
You know, so.
And tell me you didn't have like just in one of those moments where they were describing like, nah, you came from a place where even the air was free, and you're like, oh man, I've got the Firefly theme song running through my head so fierce right now.
It's like, let me go get my brown coat real quick. You know.
Totally. So to finish up the spoilers, we've been talking about aliens eventually walking into this, and I was really happy with how this book decided to introduce an alien organization or organism or species. So when Holden gets it wrong the second time as to who's behind all of this, we eventually discovered that it is one of these contract military-esque firms. And what Julie was a part of is her crew had discovered this contractor's ship where there was this proto-molecule. They call it the proto-molecule, and it has extremely aggressive, it influences biology in an extremely aggressive fashion. And it's these military contractors, they eventually find like a piece of video from one of their top scientists who described that this was on the Saturn moon Phoebe. Was it Saturn's moon?
Yeah.
And that Saturn's moon, that Phoebe, was actually extrasolar. So this was launched at our solar system and was probably intended to land on one of the inner planets like Mars or Earth, and just got caught in Saturn's gravitational pull and became a moon. But what was on it was a biological proto-molecule that was going to rewrite all of the biology of whatever planet it landed on. And that this was a method for this alien species to travel the universe. We don't know in the context of Leviathan Wakes. I'm sure it's explored in later books as to what if the intent was actually malicious or if this was just their way of literally spreading their seed throughout the galaxy. But because it was hung up on Phoebe for so long, it took so long before humanity could evolve to travel throughout their solar system and then encounter this protomolecule. That's a very different entity than what the protomolecule was supposed to come in contact with. So we eventually find this out in the context of Miller finding Julie's body, and she's been infected by this. And then the space station that they're on, the military contract team gets this biological material from Julie and uses it to infect, what is it? It's 1.5 million people on
something like that. I think
something like that.
It's over 1 million people because
they
couldn't test. This is what I love is that this contract, this sounds terrible. So you get infected with this stuff and you eventually become a vomit zombie, and these tendrils and filaments start sprouting out of your eyes and orifices, and it sounds horrific and it sounds terrible. The book does a wonderful job of making you feel like this is super gross. But the scientists make a point out of saying like, well, yeah, we would test the protomolecule on individual organisms, but it just really wasn't enough biomass for us to know what this thing could do. So we needed to infect the whole space station. And now we'll have a much better sense of what this thing can do. And that was their plan, was to create this giant solar system conflict in a way. Like you start a war between Mars and the Belters. And if a whole space station just sort of suddenly goes dark, well, that's just, a casualty of war. It totally flies under the radar. And you're like, that's actually pretty ingenious. I could totally see a current day modern military organization thinking that way and coming up with contingency plans for testing stuff like that. And in the worst way possible that this type of stuff can drive humanity to do terrible, terrible things. It's also kind of perfect in nailing just how awesomely terrible this move really is.
Well, last week when they announced that extrasolar asteroid that passed through our solar system in real life, oh god,
protomolecule. We're all going to become a giant puddle of black goo.
It passed us. Just remember, guys, it passed.
No, they did. Hey, they did possibly find some sort of extrasolar molecule on in the International Space Station now. But
Oh,
that's
really?
a whole other thing.
Oh my God, that is the movie
Life.
Life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is 10 times better than
Prometheus and Covenant. Alien Covenant's so bad.
yeah.
It's just so bad. I mean, like, can we just take 1 second here in this podcast? Why? Why does it have to be that terrible?
Let me just tell you just the quick experience that I had with that movie. Sam and I went to go watch it, and when that scene where the captain of the ship said, "It's my faith. This is what God has." It's basically God basically is directing him there, and we both looked at each other. It was like, nah.
No.
And I was as soon as he said that, I was like, God, I wish I was watching Alien 3. And that's terrible.
It's just, I like what I love about the original Alien, and I'm not wearing my Wayland Yutani baseball cap. What I like about Alien and Aliens, everyone in those films is good at their jobs. Like even Bill Paxton's character, game over, man, game over. Like, he's still actually good at his job. He's just kind of a whiny dude, like in Prometheus and Covenant, everyone is terrible at their job, and they're on like these incredible installations and spaceships,
$5 trillion
spaceships.
Let's just put the numbers out there.
They're awful and they're so dumb. Okay, we'll have to save that for a completely different show. I don't want to completely wreck the end of Leviathan Wakes, but obviously this is part of a series. And so once these characters start to find out what the stakes really are, that now we're dealing with an extraterrestrial entity, which has now started absorbing, morphing, and altering the biology of 1 million people on this space station, it then starts to exhibit behavior. And that's kind of where I want to leave off our discussion right there, because that's where I feel the book, and again, in the best way possible, does introduce that little notion of fantasy magic, when the giant rock, Phoebe, the moon, that Saturn's moon, starts to be able to navigate on its own.
That's Eros.
I'm sorry. The Eros space station. The Eros space station is...
Eros is like the worst settlement. Context. Eros is like the worst settlement of all the Belter settlements. Like,
it's worse than Ceres Station.
It was like one of the very, very first Belter settlements.
And that became sort of like bad... What do we want to say? It's like bad Atlantic City in space.
Yeah, exactly. With all the casinos, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's in the context, you if you put yourself in the place of these characters, these military forces have taken over the policing of this, basically like Atlantic City in space, but like in a bad way. And they pull a radiation alarm, and they corral all of the people of this space station up into basically a casino level, and they're all packed in there like, fish in a barrel. And then they introduce the proto-molecule to a couple people in these radiation bunkers so they could actually irradiate them faster to get this thing to grow more aggressively, and then just unleashed all of these vomit zombies on this packed in, wild, desperate group of people. And it reminds me of movies like Wreck. You're screwed either way. You're either going to get killed by a vomit zombie, or these military outfits are going to gun you down if you try to escape. And it's like the worst contained conflict, because even if you could try and leave the station, like you're in outer space, there's nowhere you can really go. You're trapped on all sides. And the book does that incredible job of capturing you in that moment. But once Eros, the proto-molecule, has infected all of these people, it starts morphing them together. It starts using all of this material, this biological material, to create something new. And that's what I thought was so well structured, is Eros starts to move. It can navigate, it can maneuver. We're talking about a giant hunk of rock, but it can do so without the same limitations on inertia. So people who are on Eros aren't getting thrown into walls when this moon starts moving, or this giant piece of rock starts moving. That's where the book sort of leaves you off at the end of Leviathan Wakes, is something else is happening, and we're exposed to a new type of biological technology that humanity hasn't discovered on their own. And this could be something really exciting, but it's also something horrifically terrifying, that this piece of rock seems to be able to think and move on its own.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Mm-hmm.
Why did I say agree? That's exactly what happened. All right.
Well, I mean, just like that, I had my facts right there. See, that's what I like about that. That's what I like about good science fiction, is you can throw in one little element of magic. And I love that the characters in the book actually do go to length to describe the behavior of this rock moving as not being just straight up magic.
Yeah,
but they can't explain how it's doing what it's doing.
Yeah. They explain the expulsion of energy, not the energy used to propel it, but the energy expelled. And it was equal to how many nukes? A lot of nukes.
Yeah.
A whole lot of nukes.
Oh, yeah.
And so there is still like a grounding in this universe, but now they're experiencing something that they've never seen before. And hopefully what I'm hoping we see in further, because I'm going to keep reading the series. I'm not going to stop here. What I hope that we see is some exploration of that, where now we have a goal that humanity can work towards. You know, like in a Star Trek like world, you'd see an alien species has warp drive. If you see that, then you would want that, and you would start trying to figure out how to make that work. And here they've seen an example of propulsion and energy generation on a scale far larger than anything that humanity can currently do. And so it would make sense to me that they would want to exploit that, or figure it out, or at least try and adapt our current methods of energy generation and propulsion to better resemble that.
Yeah. I won't give anything away, but yeah, you're going to enjoy these next few books.
Yeah. Well, we also have from Nionix in the chat, and he's like, just wait for book 3. You're like, okay. I mean, I'm already stoked to read book 2. So I think this will be pretty great. And especially now, having gone through this and understanding like what happens on Eros, when I've seen images of the Expanse, and a lot of people have shared images of discovering Julie's body, and it's like all weird and gross and awful looking, and a lot of that stuff is making a lot more sense now. So it's pretty gnarly.
Yeah, I will continue reading it, because I have one book left in P.F. Hamilton. Just a quick disclosure in terms of listening to audiobooks. Before this year, I've only read 3 books. I have now read 9. I've now listened to 9 books this year. 8 have been P.F. Hamilton. And then even this, I remember when you said I should join in and read Leviathan Wake. I was like, I don't think I would be that fast with it though. And I actually started like maybe 2.5 weeks ago, 3 weeks.
So I gotta say, I mean, this book is one of the fastest reads I've been through in a while. It took me it's a 500-page book, and I actually read, dead tree pulp. It took me about 2 weeks to chew through it. I think the last time I had this much fun, literally like chewing my way through a book, was with Ender's Game, which Ender's Game I read, I think, over a 3-day weekend, because it's a shorter book. This one, even though I'm in that bad habit of I'll read when I'm getting ready for bed, and then 5 minutes later I'm asleep, this book actually kept me up. Like, I was struggling to keep my eyes open because I needed to get to that next page. And it's such a fun read for as dark and as grimy as some of these passages can get.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree. I would have headphones on and lay in bed and pass out, wake up, and instead of me going back to bed and sleep, I will actually open my phone and skip back to the exact spot, stop, and then go back to bed. I'm like, I need to just make sure I'm at the right spot.
Pro tip for anyone who does this for audiobooks: I always set a bookmark right before bed. Like,
yeah, I should do that. I should.
Yeah.
But the thing is that mine is, I would like, usually what happens is I'll be working or writing something and I have my headphones on, I'm listening, and I keep doing other stuff and I'm still listening, and I'm doing other stuff and still listening. And then it's time to go to bed and I change and I'm still listening. And, you know, I'm in bed at that point. And I've already done like 3 hours of the book.
I really wish that I had a better system. I don't know. Is there a system for moving back and forth, going audiobook to like ebook? I don't think there is, right?
I know that you can get both of them through Amazon, but I don't think that they link together.
See, I really need that. What I need is like some kind of tracking system where if I have like, you know, if I have Audible, and that's an Amazon company, and I have the ebook also through Amazon.
Well, you can do chapters. I mean,
yeah, but I have to manage that myself. What I want is someone to do all my thinking for me.
Come on.
Like also to like chew my food for me.
No. That technology won't come around until we actually have the Epstein drive.
Yes. When somebody would basically shoot themselves to the stars forever.
So all in all, I really do have to say, like, let's wrap this up because I know I'm keeping you guys up pretty late for your own time zones here. But this was a great find for me. I know I was making fun of you last week on not reading Hitchhiker's Guide, but this is the
I haven't read that either.
This is a new hit series. So Enobong, there are actually two that I would really like to get your takes on in future. I mean, to have you back on future podcasts.
Yeah.
I don't think we're gonna redo a podcast on the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, but I think you should read it.
Okay.
But then also Ender's Game. I think in everything that you've been reading recently, that just the first book, not like the whole, because there are two different 4-book series featuring all these characters, but just the very first book, Ender's Game, was a very formative read for me. And so now what I need to do is also catch up and binge the show. So I'm only one more episode. I finish Punisher, and then I'm right into The Expanse, and I'm gonna chew through that while I pick up book 2 of
it's gonna be quick. But also the one thing I will say about the show though is it is one of the slowest building shows in terms of like pacing. What they cover per episode is not much, but yet a lot at the same time.
So getting back to that though, that's exactly what I want. I want a show that knows its arc. So I don't have any concerns that they're going to go off on a weird tangent or they're going to do something different with, like, totally different with these characters. Obviously, the translation, the adaptation, going from book to TV screen is going to change some things in the story structure. But it's the same thing that I think why people have been so into Game of Thrones. We have a lot of confidence that the writing team behind these properties, they have some sense of how this story's going to eventually end. And so even if the show takes some time to build up what's happening in this universe, I already feel like I'm in better hands than if I'm on just any kind of network sci-fi-ish drama. You know, like if you try and pick up like a Blind Spot or something like that, that show doesn't make any sense. Or what was the James Spader show? That Blacklist. After half a season, they gave up on the conceit of the show. You know, like, I have no idea where this story's going now. I don't think the writers know where this story's going now. When I've got 7 books, the 7th book apparently Neonix saying is coming out December in the first week of December.
Next week.
When I have 7 books, I can feel pretty confident that that's probably 14 seasons of television.
I will say before you get in, so the first season is about the first half of the first book. So
no, that's what I'm saying is I kind of want that. I want that structure to owe the depth, to owe the intricacies, to really explain and ground what this universe represents. And you need to take time to do that. You know, you can't just like, oh, spaceships and now and nukes. You know, like you just can't jump into a story like this. But I don't mind taking time to set all that up when I have a lot of confidence that they have a story to tell. It's not just going to be taking a whole bunch of time to do something and then I'm not going to see it paid off. I already have seen parts of this show and small video clips of this show and screen grabs of this show that make me feel like my time will be well invested with this show. It won't be wasted.
I'll just say, I think there is a benefit to having the second book read before starting the second season.
Oh, thanks for telling me now, man. I've already watched the second season.
Oh no!
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.
Well,
I mean, so yeah, that is on Andrew. So Enobong, you're right to blame him for that.
Mm-hmm.
So we should probably wrap this up. Again, I think all around we all enjoyed this experience via audiobook or actually reading it on paper. This is a heavy recommend if you guys haven't already read it. Getting the sense that I'm just way behind the curve because everyone who's interacting with us on the show seems to be a lot better experienced and a lot better versed on this than I was. We do have a question from Bored Buddha. What's up, Buddha? When is the Star Wars book read? I'm having, because I was thinking about that the other day. We were Andrew and I offline on Twitter were kind of joking about Star Trek books, like finding some really crazy old Star Trek books and maybe something we could bring in there. And for Star Wars, I'm not entirely sure what to point to right now, because the Star Wars universe, a lot of what when I was a kid would have been considered loosely canon, has kind of been thrown out the window. So I don't know what we should do there to try and.
So here's the thing: it's not necessarily thrown out the window. It is. I don't know what they call it again, but basically, it's in a separate corner.
Legends
or Legacy or something. Yes, they can go in and tap and take stories from to create part of the new canon of thing. So it is Star Wars alternate universe.
See, but that's the problem is it's now been relegated into like an offshoot or alternate universe where it used to fit in pretty well. And so like you look a character like Admiral Thrawn.
Oh yeah.
Doesn't really fit in the current zeitgeist of Star Wars.
They do have him in there though.
He is there in Rebels.
But
yeah.
Not
Rebels.
in the way that
it's
the
true.
Books expanded on his character, and then the other bloodlines of like the Skywalkers and stuff.
I know. I just want a future where Luke is happy and not a hermit.
That's not gonna happen.
Yes,
it needs to be dark and edgy and dark edgy and dark.
Yeah.
Robes.
Buddha says he can help. Send suggestions, I would say.
Yeah, Buddha, hit us up. We'd definitely be interested in that because we already do have our book for next month planned. We're gonna do some young adult. I'm actually really excited about this because I've read some other works this is from Cory Doctorow. We're going to read Little Brother. This is a young adult sort of, I don't know, reading the jacket on the book, it sounds to me like it's going to be a little like Wolverines. You know, what is that? What is that movie?
Yeah.
Red Dawn? Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Like kind of anyway. But anyway, Cory Doctorow, I've read a couple of his other books and I really like his style. A lot of commentary on sort of digital literacy and privacy protection and some influences like that. And Little Brother came highly recommended as being another great example of that series. So that's going to be our book towards the end of December. We don't have a date just yet, but if you catch the Geek Book Club on the Facebooks, we will be posting an event page where we'll have our next podcast recording available, so you can join us live, or at least you'll know when we'll have the audio ready for you guys to take a listen to. So Cory Doctorow, Little Brother. And that'll be our book for December. And we'll start talking. Actually, what I want to do is hopefully get a little ahead because of the holiday season and get a book out for January soon as well. And I think, Andrew, you had a recommendation for that. I can't remember what it was.
Yeah, I've actually, if you guys caught you guys who follow us on Instagram actually might have caught this. Actually, there's a random bookstore that I went to. That I'm pretty sure I could have gotten sucked into the world of the never-ending story if I was not careful there. We found The Left Hand of Darkness by Ursula K. Le Guin. I'm butchering that name, but it seems pretty interesting.
Okay, so Left Hand of Darkness, we're going to give that a shot. That looks like it's going to be a book for January. So your next two books, Cory Doctorow, little brother, and I've already forgotten the title of the book for January. So
I was going to say, I've forgotten the name of the book. It's coming out as a movie soon. When you guys are ready to talk Ready Player One,
dude, would you be interested in doing an addendum podcast where we talk about going to see the movie? Like, have you read the book?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so I would be very interested in doing an adaptation discussion. What we liked about putting it up on the big screen and what we didn't like. And I'm a little concerned about the film adaptation of this. And again, this isn't because of who's involved in the project. And I think Spielberg actually is the right director to tap for this kind of nostalgia. I'm a little concerned about the amount of time that you can tell a story in with a feature film.
I agree. Sam said exactly the same thing. And we said this should have been 2 movies if you're going to do this.
See, and when you read Ender's Game, and because I know you saw the film, and why everything in the films feels so weirdly abbreviated when the book does such a beautiful job of expanding on that kind of nuance, that's exactly the kind of concern I have with these kinds of adaptations now. I feel so much better about taking these kinds of properties to TV. Make it an 8-episode miniseries on Hulu, and I think you will do a much better job of actually telling that story than if you try and cram an entire book into 2 hours of screen time. Makes me a little nervous.
Yeah. I mean, if this movie was 3 hours, I would say, okay, maybe you can you can shave things off, but it'll be fine. But you're right, 2 hours. We'll see. But yeah, I'm up for that. I'm definitely up for it.
Yeah, we'll do a special edition addendum podcast. Our feelings on the adaptation of Ready Player One. But until that time, I think it's time to wrap this puppy up. Again, I want to thank you for joining us, Enobong. It's always a pleasure to chat with you about this kind of stuff. It's just a shame that our show is only once a month. That
I mean, it does give me time to
right
catch up.
But we will definitely have to catch you on future podcasts too, and especially if we can get that Ready Player One show get that together. Where can people find the stuff that you're working on right now? Because you're really deep in with movie commentaries and tech conversations. Where can people follow those discussions?
You can follow me on all the social networks. It's BooredatWork, spelled with 2 O's. We do have a comic book show, myself and Board Buddha, who, of course, chimed in the chat where we talk about comic.
Have some book recommendations for us.
I know. He is on that. He definitely is on point. So we talk about comic book shows, movies, and news. Throughout the week. And then, of course, the YouTube channel, we cover a lot of tech there. And if you're watching this now, tomorrow morning, I'll be doing my live reaction to the Avengers Infinity War trailer that comes out. So you can check that out. And then, of course, I have a show on Saturdays that I co-host with Mr. Juan Magna-Hill here, as well as Warren Bowman and Sam. And it's a weekly. We cover all things tech. And you should join this because we're going to spend probably half the time. I know I haven't even told Juan this, but half of this week will be about net neutrality because it is very, very important.
Yeah, definitely a conversation that needs to be joined, and one that I've been pretty passionate about too. I'm happy that people are. I'm a little concerned because I feel like people are joining the conversation maybe a bit too late to affect real change, but this is something that's going to be an ongoing fight over the next couple of years. So it'll be a topic worth digging into. And Andrew, you have been an amazing, busy little bee getting us all set up, man. I can't thank you enough. You've done an epic amount of work getting our Facebook page up for the Geek Book Club, getting a Twitter account for the Geek Book Club, and helping me sort out some of our issues in getting an RSS feed for the Geek Book Club. And I just want to, on the show, thank you personally for tackling all that, because a fun conversation is great, but if no one's really listening to it, you start to have those mental exercises of like, what's the sound of one hand clapping, and that's not fun.
Well, and Yeah, absolutely. It's a pleasure. It's been a lot of fun. One thing also that I've been working on too is we have our Geek Book Club Instagram, and I've found a couple of places. I've been going around where I live and going around different local, because we've always promoted wanted people to go support their local businesses and support their local libraries.
Yeah, definitely.
If you're going to follow along with us, I discovered a bookstore here in Columbia Missouri, where I live, that has books from before Columbus came across the big pond over here. First edition Mark Twain books, and so I've been getting videos and pictures of those on there that I come across. They've been nice enough at the store to let us go and take a look. Finding a small little bookstore where I grabbed all these random Star Trek books that from the 70s.
Hold up, Vulcan.
All right.
Gotta hold up Vulcan.
I know, Honey, I Shrunk the Spock or something,
I don't know. What I love is I can't tell if it's Honey, I Shrunk the Spock, or apparently on Vulcan, Vulcans have to regularly fight giant earth ants.
I know, right? I know.
It's so crazy.
Well, yeah, and I found a ton of them. Apparently she has like a bag, like a trash bag full of Star Trek dime novels. Why
is that metaphor so appropriate? Like, where do we put all these Star Trek novels? I don't know, a giant trash bag.
It's great. But yeah, so we've got those. I'm gonna be trying to make it there just about every week, just to kind of see, because it's one of those places where you have to go in and, like, it's loosely organized. You have to go and dig through to kind of see what you get. So yeah, but that's one of those things we're just trying to just be more engaging out there, and
you've definitely inspired me. I want to go, because I've been looking up what's around me too, and like there are a couple little hole in the wall. I should even say that because I haven't been to them yet. I don't know if they're hole in the wall, but some little mom and pop shops still open. I'm maybe planning another trek down into like West Hollywood to go hit Book Soup, because that was my favorite haunt back when I was living down there.
Oh man,
so, I want to do a little urban discovery too, and hopefully I'll get some of those photos up, because I don't know, there's something fun about like black and white photos of dusty books on shelves.
Right? Yeah,
it looks cool.
Oh yeah, and it's so yeah. Just keep an eye out for. Give us a follow on Instagram. I also will be posting it to Facebook. Also, I'll be posting this video. Once we have it full out on YouTube here, I'll be posting it to the Facebook page as well, so that everybody can follow there as well. And yeah, just we're all over the social webs right now.
Right on. Like our little pet project just growing up month by month. You can catch Andrew. His personal Twitter is @fatproduce, FATPRODUCE, and I of course am humbly at SomeGadgetGuy. Currently hosted on my personal YouTube channel, but we will have that RSS feed back up and running for this month's show, and hope you guys will subscribe so that you can keep up with all of the exciting developments in the world of geek literature. We've got a lot of fun stuff coming up. I don't think you guys are going to want to miss it. So for Andrew, for myself, and for our special guest, Enobong Etteh, thank you so much for joining us on the Geek Book Club. Catch us around the web and join the conversation. We want you guys to participate in this as well. This is why we give you guys the book a month in advance, so you can also join the discussion. If you choose to, or if you enjoy this kind of discussion, please consider sharing this podcast with your family and friends, and reviewing this podcast wherever podcasts can be reviewed. And folks, that's the end of this broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us, and we'll catch you all on the next Geek Book Club.
Ciao.